He humiliated her in front of the entire pack, seconds before they crowned her queen. The marble amphitheatre of Cresta Ridge had stood for 200 years. It had been carved by hand from the pale stone of the northern cliffs, built wide enough to hold every wolf in the territory and deep enough that sound travelled in perfect waves from the ceremonial stage all the way to the outermost standing ring. The ancient ones who designed it understood something about grief. They understood that when a people needed to mourn together, they needed to feel each other breathing. They needed to know they were not alone in the dark. Tonight, nearly 500 wolves filled every inch of it. Warriors lined the curved outer walls with their hands clasped low and their eyes cast down. Elders occupied the carved stone seats arranged in 2 long ceremonial rows, their ash-grey robes folded neatly over their laps, their faces carrying the particular stillness of people who had buried the great before and would bury the great again. Merchants stood beside healers. Young wolves barely old enough to have attended a gathering this size pressed quietly into the spaces between adults, wide-eyed and uncertain, trying to understand the weight of what this night meant. Frozen rain came down in a thin, steady curtain over the open amphitheatre. Nobody moved to cover themselves. This was not a night to ask for comfort. In the centre of the stage, on a raised stone platform surrounded by 4 ceremonial candles, whose flames did not waver despite the rain, rested the coffin of Alpha Patriarch Cyril Voss. He had led Cresta Ridge for 31 years. He had built the outer rim settlements with his own hands alongside the workers. He had sat at the bedsides of sick wolves in the dead of winter and stayed until morning came. He had been, in every sense that actually mattered, the kind of leader that people did not realize was extraordinary until the moment he was gone. The coffin was draped in deep iron-grey linen, sealed at the corners with the Cresta Ridge crest pressed in silver wax. Dried elderflower and pine resin burned slowly in stone vessels positioned along the stage walls, and the smell of it drifted out over the crowd in soft, heavy waves. Every wolf present would carry that smell inside them for the rest of their lives. It would find them years later, without warning, on quiet evenings and ordinary mornings, and it would bring them right back here. The sacred drums had been sounding since sundown. Now they had stopped. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Serena had ever heard. She stood at the front of the stage, slightly to the right of the coffin, exactly where the lunar of Cresta Ridge was expected to stand during the final rites of a patriarch. She wore an ash-grey mourning robe like everyone else. Her dark hair was pulled back simply, pinned at the nape of her neck. No jewelry, no ornamentation. She had not wanted any. Her face was still. Not the stillness of someone who was numb, and not the stillness of someone performing composure for an audience. It was something quieter and more deliberate than either of those things. It was the stillness of someone who had already done all of their breaking in private, in the weeks and months before this night, and had arrived here with nothing left to shatter. Her hands were folded in front of her. Her eyes were fixed on the candle flame nearest to the coffin. She was thinking about the old Alpha's hands, how thin they had become in his final weeks, how he had reached for hers one evening when the room was dark and the healers had stepped out and there was no one else present, and held on with a grip that was still surprisingly strong for someone that's sick, and said to her in a voice barely above a whisper, "Hold the line, child. Just hold it a little longer." She had not understood everything he meant that night. She understood it now. A murmur moved through the crowd before she heard the doors. Then she heard them, the great stone entrance doors of the amphitheatre swinging open with the low, resonant groan of weight and hinges, the sound carrying across the silence like something being torn. She did not turn around immediately. She did not need to. She could feel the shift in the air the way you feel a temperature change before a storm. Something in the crowd changed. The quiet that had been grief became something else, something tighter, something confused. Then came the sound of boots on marble, confident, unhurried, deliberate. She turned. Damien entered the amphitheatre the way he entered every room, like the room had been waiting for him to arrive before it could begin. He wore his Alpha ceremonial armor, polished silver over black, the Cresta Ridge crest across his chest catching the torchlight and throwing it back into the eyes of the nearest wolves. He wore no mourning grey. He had not even attempted it. His chin was lifted, his shoulders squared, and his expression was the expression of a man who had decided tonight was his night and had dressed accordingly. He was not alone. The woman on his arm wore red. Not a deep red, not a wine red, not anything that could be mistaken for a somber choice on a difficult evening. She wore a brilliant, blazing, defiant red silk gown that had clearly been chosen, cut, and fitted with extraordinary precision and intention. It fell from her shoulders in a way that made absolutely certain that every wolf in the amphitheater understood, within the first 3 seconds, that she was heavily pregnant. Bianca. The silence that followed their entrance was not the silence of grief. It was the silence of 500 wolves holding their breath at the same time. Serena watched them walk down the center path toward the stage. She watched Bianca's hand resting on her belly, casual and unhurried, as if she were strolling through a garden. She watched Damien's eyes move over the crowd with the faint, satisfied expression of a man performing for an audience he has already decided belongs to him. She felt the bond between them in that moment. The mate bond, the thing that had once been warm and certain and real, the thing she had believed in completely once, a long time ago in a version of herself she could barely remember now. She felt it the way you feel a bruise when pressure is applied, not with surprise, just with the dull, familiar ache of something that had been damaged so long it had become ordinary. She did not move. Damien climbed the stage steps without looking at her. He positioned himself at the center, directly in front of the coffin, directly in front of the elders, directly in front of everyone. Then he turned to Serena and looked at her in a way that made something cold slide down through the center of her chest. He was not angry, he was not even contemptuous. He looked at her the way someone looks at an object they are about to move out of the way. That was the part that stayed with her, not that he hated her, that he had stopped thinking of her as someone worth hatting. He spoke loudly enough for every wolf in the amphitheater to hear every word. He said the bond was over, that it had been over long before tonight, and tonight was simply the formal acknowledgement of that reality. He said the pack needed strong, proven bloodlines moving forward, not sentiment. He said Serena had served her role, and that role was now concluded. He used the word concluded like she was a chapter in a book he was finally finished with. He said she was free to step down from the stage. The rain fell. Somewhere in the middle rows a woman made a soft, involuntary sound, the kind of sound that comes out of a person before they can stop it, the kind of sound that happens when something cruel occurs in a space that was supposed to be sacred. Serena felt the mate bond in the precise moment it severed. It was not the violent, tearing sensation she had always imagined it would be. It was quieter than that. It was like a string being cut cleanly. One moment tension, the next nothing, a door swinging shut with barely a sound, a flame going out. She stood completely still as it happened. And then, from somewhere deep inside herself, from whatever place a person stores the things they carry for years without being allowed to put down, she felt something she had not expected to feel in this moment on this stage, in front of all of these people. She felt the faintest, quietest sense of relief. She thought about 8 months of work. She thought about the late Alpha's hand in hers. She thought about the documents she had been holding, carefully and patiently, and without a single word to the wrong person, for longer than Damien would ever know. She unfolded her hands, she held them loosely at her sides. She stepped down from the stage exactly as commanded. The crowd parted for her in absolute silence. She walked to the edge of the inner ring and she stopped. She did not leave the amphitheater. She simply stood at the edge of the crowd, hands loose at her sides, rain falling soft and cold onto her upturned face. Behind her, Damien straightened and turned toward the elder row with his chin raised, and that satisfied, expectant expression already settling into the lines of his face. He was already waiting for the crown. The old Alpha's candle flame did not move. Serena pressed her feet into the cold marble and waited. Damien stood at the center of that stage like he had already won. And honestly, watching him up there, chest out, armor catching the torchlight, you could almost understand how he convinced himself of that. He had the look of a man who had rehearsed this moment in his head so many times that reality had started to feel like a formality. Like the pack, the elders, the sacred ceremony itself were all just props arranged around the main event, which was him. He began to speak. He talked about legacy. He talked about bloodlines and strength and the future of Cresta Ridge. He talked about the pack's need for decisive leadership in uncertain times, using the word decisive the way people do when they mean obedient, when they mean unquestioning, when they mean mine. His voice rolled out across the amphitheater with the practiced confidence of someone who had never once been told no by a room and did not believe tonight would be any different. Bianca stood just behind his left shoulder. She had moved up onto the stage sometime during Serena's walk to the outer ring, unhurried and deliberate, one hand still resting on her belly. She had arranged her face into something that was trying to look solemn and not quite managing it. There was a brightness in her eyes that the occasion did not call for, a readiness, like a person sitting at a table who has already decided what they are going to order before the menu arrives. The crowd listened, but the crowd did not move the way a crowd moves when it believes what it is hearing. There was no shifting of weight toward the speaker, no small nods, no exhales of agreement. The 500 wolves standing in that frozen rain held a very particular kind of stillness, the kind that is not peace, the kind that is waiting. Damien did not notice. He announced Bianca as the new lunar of Cresta Ridge. He spoke of the child she carried as the next generation of alpha blood, the continuation of the line, the living proof that the pack's future was already being built. He used the word destiny with complete sincerity. He spoke about the alpha bloodline succession as though it were gravity, as though it were simply the way things were, and the way things would always be, as though the word of a dead patriarch and a room full of elders were secondary considerations to the fact of his own ambition. Then he turned to the elder row and lifted his chin. The crown, his expression said, the crown now, please. High Elder Silvano had not moved since Damien began speaking. He sat in the first seat of the left ceremonial row, his grey robe perfectly still, his aged hands resting flat on his knees, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere slightly past Damien's left ear. He was a small man in the way that certain trees are small, compact, rooted, unhurried. He had sat in that elder seat through 4 successions. He had seen the full range of what power did to people when they reached for it without being ready. His face right now showed nothing. That was the part that should have told Damien everything. None of the elders moved. Damien's lifted chin dropped a fraction, just a fraction, barely visible. But Serena, standing at the outer edge of the inner ring with rain on her face and her hands loose at her sides, saw it. She had spent years learning to read the small things about that man, because the small things were the only honest things he ever gave away. He spoke again, louder this time, invoking the succession right by name, using its formal ancestral title, the way someone uses a key they are increasingly certain should be fitting into this particular lock. The elders remained seated and silent. Bianca's hand moved slightly on her belly, tightened then released, a small gesture, most people missed it. Then Matteo stepped forward. He came from the far right end of the elder row, not from the ceremonial seats but from the space just behind them, where legal counsel was traditionally permitted to stand during succession proceedings. He was not a large man and he was not a loud one. He moved the way precise people move, with an economy of motion that communicated without announcing that every step had been considered. He carried a sealed iron document case in his right hand. It was old. The kind of old that means it has been waiting in a specific place for a specific moment. He did not look at Damien when he placed the case on the ceremonial table at the front of the stage. He looked at Serena. Just for a moment, a clean, direct look with no performance in it. Then he opened the case. He laid 3 documents on the table in a careful, unhurried row. Damien's eyes moved to the table. Something shifted in his face. Not fear, not yet, but the first faint crack of a man beginning to understand that the room he is standing in may not be the room he thought he walked into. Silvano rose from his seat. He picked up the first document and began to read aloud. He read the dates. He read the border coordinates. He read the names of the foreign rival territories that had received land transfers from Cresta Ridge over the preceding 14 months. He read the figures, the acreage, the payments received in return. He read them in a voice that was not raised and not dramatic, in the flat, clear tone of a man who understands that facts do not need decoration to be devastating. The outer rim territories, the farming settlements, the pasture lands that fed 300 families through winter, all of it sold, piece by piece. The funds routed not into PAC infrastructure, not into the outer rim families who worked that land, but into private accounts connected directly to Bianca's family estates in the eastern reaches. A sound moved through the crowd, not words, just sound, the sound of 500 people absorbing the same information at the same time and feeling it land. Damien said it was fabricated. He said the documents were false, that someone had engineered this, that there was a conspiracy at work against him, against his leadership, against the natural order of succession. His voice had changed. The practiced confidence was still there in the structure of his sentences, but the warmth underneath it had gone cold. He sounded like a man playing the role of someone who is not afraid. Matteo waited for him to finish. Then Matteo picked up the second document and cited, line by line, the chain of custody for each intercepted manifest, the original signed physical seals, the digital transmission records, the dates they were filed, the name of the person who had authorized their preservation and secured them under Elder Seal 8 months prior to this night. He did not say Serena's name. He did not need to. Everyone in the amphitheater was already looking at her. She stood at the outer ring with the rain coming down soft on her upturned face, and she did not look away from the stage. Then Matteo picked up the third document. He read the outcast law, the ancestral statute. The language was old, but he translated it as he went in plain, simple terms that left no room for misunderstanding. A child born from a severed mate bond during the reign of a sitting sovereign queen carries no legal name within the pack, no claim to title, no inheritance of land, rank, or wealth, not 1 acre, not 1 coin, not 1 letter of the pack's name. The silence that followed was of a different quality than any silence that had come before it in the amphitheater that night. Bianca's hand dropped from her belly. It was a small movement, involuntary, the kind of thing a body does before the mind catches up, but every wolf standing in that amphitheater saw it because every wolf in that amphitheater was watching her. Her face, which had been arranged so carefully all evening, went through several things at once: calculation, disbelief, a desperate, rapid reassessment of a plan that had taken months to build and had just been taken apart in under 3 minutes. Damien turned to Serena. He turned to her with his jaw tight and something wild moving behind his eyes, and he said it in a voice that was meant to sound commanding and instead sounded like what it actually was, which was the sound of a man who has just understood that the ground beneath him is not what he thought it was. He said, "You planned this." Serena looked at him. It was the first time she had looked directly at him since he cut the bond. She held his gaze for a long moment in the cold rain. She thought about the years. She thought about the patience. She thought about every night she had sat with the old Alpha in that dim room, building something quiet and careful and airtight, while the man in front of her built something loud and careless and full of holes. She said, "You gave me 8 months. She said it simply, no anger in it, no triumph either, just the plain truth of it, offered back to him the way you return something that was never really his to begin with. Damien's face went through something then that she had never seen on it before. It was not quite fury. It was something closer to the specific, terrible shock of a person who has spent years underestimating someone and has only just, in this one moment, understood the full cost of that mistake. He moved toward the elder table. His personal guard stepped with him, flanking his sides, hands moving toward their weapons. Silvano raised one hand. The guard stopped. Not because of the hand itself, because of what the hand meant coming from the man who raised it. Because Silvano had not raised his voice and had not drawn a weapon and had not issued a threat, and all 500 wolves in that amphitheater understood in the marrow of their bones that the room had already changed leadership, and the guards understood it too, even if Damien had not caught up yet. Silvano reached down beside his ceremonial chair. He lifted the iron box. It was old, older than the amphitheater, older than anyone present could personally account for. The iron was dark and slightly pitted from age, sealed with a clasp that had not been opened in longer than living memory. He set it on the ceremonial table beside the 3 documents and rested both hands on its surface, and the amphitheater went so quiet that the sound of the rain on marble was the only sound left in the world. Damien stared at the box, and for the first time all evening, standing in his polished armor with his lifted chin and his rehearsed certainty, he looked like what he actually was. A man who had reached for something that was never meant to be his and had just run out of room to keep pretending otherwise. Silvano opened the box. He did not make a production of it. He did not announce what was inside or explain what was about to happen. He simply undid the clasp with both hands, lifted the lid, and reached in with the careful, deliberate movement of someone handling something that has waited a very long time to be used. What he withdrew was a silver iron brand, small enough to hold in one hand, its handle wrapped in aged dark leather, its head shaped into the sovereign mark of Cresta Ridge. A mark that had not been pressed into living skin in over a century. A mark that every elder present had studied in the ancestral records, and every warrior had heard described in the old stories passed down around fire pits on winter nights. The mark that was not given but revealed, the mark that confirmed what blood had already decided long before the ceremony, long before the documents, long before this rain-soaked night. The iron was glowing, not from heat applied tonight. It had been glowing since the box was opened, a soft, deep gold light pulsing from the mark the way an ember pulses when you breathe on it, steady and alive and patient, as if it had simply been waiting inside that dark iron box for the right hands to bring it into the air. Damien stared at it. His mouth opened. No sound came out for a moment. Then he found his voice and used it the way desperate people use their voices, loudly, quickly, throwing words into the air like they might form a wall. He said this was theatre. He said the elders had been manipulated. He said the sovereign mark was a relic, a piece of old ceremony with no legal authority in the modern structure of pack governance, and that no one in this amphitheatre was bound by traditions that predated current law. Silvano turned and looked at him. It was a quiet look, the kind of look that does not argue because it does not need to, the kind of look that has seen 4 successions and 2 wars and the full, long arc of what happened to men who confused their ambition with their destiny. He held that look on Damien for 3 full seconds. Then he turned away, and the turning away was its own answer, complete and final. He walked down the stage steps. The other elders rose from their ceremonial seats and followed him without a word, their grey robes moving softly in the rain, forming a slow, deliberate procession across the amphitheatre floor toward the outer ring where Serena stood. The crowd separated for them without being asked. 500 wolves pressed back on both sides and opened a clear path from the stage to the place where Serena waited, and not one of them made a sound, because every wolf in that amphitheatre understood, in the deep, wordless way that wolves understand things that matter, that what was happening right now was not theatre, and was not politics, and was not a legal argument. It was a reckoning. Serena watched the elders come toward her. She had known this moment was coming. She had known it in the way you know something that has been true for a long time before the world catches up to it. The old Alpha had told her. Matteo had walked her through every step of what the night would look like. She had rehearsed her own stillness the way you rehearse for the thing you know will cost you everything to hold together. And yet, when Silvano stopped in front of her and she saw the glow of the brand in his hands and she felt the heat of it from 2 feet away, warm against the cold rain on her skin, she felt something move through her chest that no amount of preparation could have made smaller. It was not fear. It was the particular, overwhelming weight of being seen, truly seen, after years of being looked through, looked past, looked at only long enough to be dismissed. The old Alpha had seen her, and he had done something about it. Silvano met her eyes. He said, by the blood clause of the founding sovereign decree, by the maternal lineage of the Voss line confirmed and sealed 8 months prior to this night, by the unanimous confirmation of the Elder Council of Cresta Ridge, what is dormant is now revealed. He pressed the brand to her collarbone. She had been told it would hurt. It did, a sharp, clean burn that moved through her like a current, from the point of contact outward through her chest and shoulders and down her arms to her fingertips. She did not flinch. She did not make a sound. She stood in the rain with her chin level and her eyes open, and she let the mark come. The gold light bloomed against her skin like a sunrise happening in fast forward. It spread from the point of the brand in branching lines, following the lines of her collarbone, and curving up toward her throat and down toward her sternum, glowing warm and undeniable against the grey of her mourning robe. It did not fade when Silvano lifted the brand away. It stayed. Steady and lit and real, pulsing softly in the rain like something that had always been there and had simply needed to be called forward. For 1 full breath, the amphitheatre held perfectly still. Then the warriors moved. All 500 of them, together, not on a command, not on a signal, but on the same instinct, the same deep recognition, the same wordless knowing that moves through a pack when the pack understands something in its bones. They turned to face her, every warrior in that curved outer ring, and they dropped to 1 knee. The sound of it was enormous, 500 knees hitting marble in near-perfect unison, the sound rolling through the amphitheatre like a wave breaking against stone. Nobody had told them to do that. That was the part that undid her, just slightly, just for a moment. She felt it move through her eyes before she could stop it, not tears exactly, just the bright, unstoppable blur of something too large to contain completely, and she blinked once and it was gone, and she was still standing, still level, still present. Two senior warriors climbed the stage steps. They approached Damien with the quiet, unhurried certainty of people executing a decision that has already been made and cannot be unmade. They did not touch him roughly. They did not need to. They simply began removing his armor, piece by piece, the ceremonial plates that marked him as Alpha of Cresta Ridge, lifting each piece away and setting it aside with a care that was almost respectful for the office even while it stripped the man of it completely. Damien did not move at first. Then he moved too much. He stepped back, he raised his voice, he invoked bloodlines and rights and the names of alliances he had made with outside territories, the same territories, Matteo noted from the table, that appeared in the border treaty documents as recipients of stolen pack land. Damien's words came faster and less organized the more armor came off, as if the plates had been holding something together that had nothing to do with the physical body underneath them. The warriors continued, steady and silent. By the time the last piece was set aside, Damien was standing in the plain underlayer beneath the armor, in the rain, in front of 500 wolves, and the man who had walked into this amphitheater like he owned, it looked exactly like what he was. A man who had been caught, a man who had built his entire sense of himself on something that was never his to claim, and who was only now, in this cold public moment, understanding the full dimensions of that mistake. Bianca tried to leave the stage. She moved toward the steps with her chin up and her red gown trailing behind her, performing a dignity she was no longer in a position to perform. Two female warriors stepped to the base of the stairs and stood there. They did not reach for her. They did not threaten her. They simply stood in her path with their arms at their sides and their eyes level, and Bianca stopped on the second step and looked at them and understood that the path she had spent months building toward was closed. Her hand went to her belly again. This time it was not a performance. It was the instinct of a woman who was frightened, and somewhere underneath all of it, Serena saw that and noted it, and let it be what it was without letting it change what needed to happen. Serena walked to the stage. She did not rush. She crossed the full width of the amphitheater floor at the same unhurried pace she had used when she stepped down from it an hour earlier, and every wolf present watched her make that walk, and every wolf present understood what it meant that she was making it this way, slowly and without urgency, as if the outcome had never been in question. She climbed the steps. She moved past Bianca without looking at her. She moved to the center of the stage, to the exact spot where Damien had stood when he cut their bond in front of everyone, and she stopped. She looked out at the pack. All those faces, warriors and healers and merchants and young wolves barely old enough to understand what they were witnessing. Outer Rim families who had been quietly going hungry while their land was sold out from under them. People who had stood in the rain tonight to honor a good man and had instead been handed something larger, stranger, and harder than they had expected to carry home. She thought about what to say. She had prepared words. Matteo had helped her shape them, precise and legally sound and organized by priority. They were good words. She opened her mouth and something else came out instead. She said the land that was taken from the Outer Rim families will be returned, all of it. That is the first order of this reign, not tomorrow, starting at first light. She said it plainly, no oratory, no flourish, just the commitment made out loud in front of everyone in a voice that did not waver. The crowd did not cheer. It was too raw for cheering. But something happened in those faces, a release of something that had been held tight for a long time, a slow, collective exhale, the specific relief of people who have been waiting without knowing they were waiting to hear that someone was going to tell them the truth. Damien was escorted from the stage by two warriors and formally assigned to the Border Labor Corps, the same borders he had sold, where he would spend the coming months rebuilding with his own hands the walls his signature had dismantled. It was not a light sentence and it was not a cruel one. It was, in its way, the most honest punishment she could have given him. You sold the walls, now you build them back. Bianca was escorted from the amphitheater quietly. No public proclamation, no formal exile. She simply left, the red gown trailing behind her through the stone archway and the doors closed, and that was that. After the pack was dismissed and the amphitheater began to empty, Matteo found her at the edge of the stage. He stood a few feet away and he did not fill the space with unnecessary words. That was the first thing she had learned to trust about him, months ago in those late sessions with the documents and the late Alpha's records. He knew when to be quiet. He knew when silence was more useful than speech. It was a rare quality. She had come to depend on it more than she expected to. She said, "You could have presented the evidence 6 months ago." He said, "We could have. The legal case was solid by then." She said, He said, "But he needed to exile you first, in front of all of them, so there would be no question about who struck first, so that when the mark appeared, no wolf in that amphitheater could say you engineered a coup. You were standing at the outer ring. He put you there. That matters in the way things matter for the next 20 years of a reign." She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the patience of it, the long, careful patience of building something that could not be argued with because it was simply, completely, undeniably true. She said, "He really thought I was going to leave." Matteo said, "Most people would have." She turned back toward the pyre. The old Alpha's coffin still rested on the stage behind her, the 4 candles still burning, steady and still in the rain-washed air. She pressed 2 fingers to the Queen's mark on her collarbone, still warm. She thought about the old Alpha's grip in that dark room. "Hold the line, child. Just hold it a little longer." She had held it. She looked outward, past the stone walls of the amphitheater, past the near territories, toward the outer rim settlements where families would wake tomorrow to news that their land was coming back to them, toward the borders that needed rebuilding, toward everything that was broken and everything that could be made whole again if the person in charge was willing to do the work. The drums began again. Soft at first, a single beat finding its rhythm, then joined by a second and a third until the sound filled the amphitheater, the way sound fills a space that has been waiting for it, full and resonant and alive. This time they beat for her. She stood in the rain and she let them.